I'm Will. This is Will the Artist. Today, we're going to talk about compression. This beat without any compression on it, just so you can hear it. All right, so let's open up our compression. And this compressor is nice because it's very visual. You have this nice graph in the center that really shows you how the sound is being affected by this compressor. Another thing to note, just with general audio stuff, when you're looking at these things, you want to notice that everything tends to read left to right. Your signal flow tends to be left to right. So, for example, this is your output. This is the last thing that's being affected. So everything from left of this is affecting it prior to the output. This is the first thing that affects it, this threshold. Then it's going to go through all this stuff, going to be in the graph. There's not much of a signal flow, but the idea is that generally things on the left tend to affect things prior to what's happening on the right. I hope that makes sense. Regardless, let's talk about the two main elements of compression, and that would be the threshold and that would be the ratio. Now, the threshold is telling the compressor what volume to start affecting the sound that's coming in through the compressor. So the sound's coming in, and it's going to peak at a certain level. Wherever that peaks is where you're going to want to put it below that compression-wise. So let me explain it a little more so you can understand, because the way I just said that, it felt a little complicated. So if I'm looking at an audio signal right here, let's actually go ahead and play this and see where this is peaking. Let's play this drum track and see where it's peaking. Now, all right, so it looks like it's peaking around negative like 10. That's where I saw it. That snare hit, obviously a snare drum is going to be the loudest hit on any drum set, so that's usually going to be your peak, that snare snap. So I saw it at about negative 5 dB. That means that to affect this sound, I need my threshold to be below negative 5 dB. Otherwise, if it's at negative 3 or 2, it's not affecting the sound at all, because the threshold is telling the compressor where to start compressing. So if I have it all the way down here, it's going to compress everything. If I have it at negative 40, it's going to compress everything that's over negative 40. Now, if all your drum hits are automatically over negative 40, then it's affecting everything. So that's the basic concept of the threshold. It's telling the compressor at what volume to start compressing. Okay? So the next thing is that the ratio is informed by the threshold, because the ratio is how much that sound is being squashed. You're going to see in this yellow line here that when I pull the ratio down, so I'm going to make it 5 to 1, say, let's make it, or 3 to 1. Let's make it 3 to 1. So that's taking everything above this negative 20 threshold and making it 3 times quieter than it was prior. I can move it up and make it 5 times, and it squashes it more. That yellow curve will get even more. If I bring this down, it'll affect it as such. So if I bring my threshold way down, that means it's going to affect the entire thing. That's a lot of compression. Now, it's been done. It is done. Somebody told me once, in a really interesting way, what too much compression does. And it almost makes you feel like musically claustrophobic, because it doesn't have a big dynamic range. The range from quiet to loud to loud is very small. So everything you hear is the same volume. Where that's very popular in, say, pop music. Or in a classical or a jazz tune, there's going to be moments where it's very quiet. Like there's sections of an entire jazz song, 5 or 6 minutes, or a solo or something like that, that's very quiet. And the dynamic range is very quiet. You wouldn't want to use a lot of compression on something like that because it ruins the element of it. But there's a utilitarian way to use this, and I want to show you how. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to find your peak, which was right around here, right? You're going to want to set it, I'd say, a little below your peak, and then squash it by 3 to 1, say. Let's do 3 to 1. And let's see what that sounds like. I'm going to play this through and see what a little squashing of the compression sounds like. Let's give it a listen. All right, now if you noticed, this left side here is showing how much it's being compressed. So what it's actually showing is the amount that it's going over this threshold and how it's being affected. So the last element to this is the attack, and that's at the speed at which the compression is going to affect it. So you have your dB limit of the volume that way. You have the amount at which it's being squashed with the ratio, and then you have the speed at which it's being done. So if you have your attack really high, it's going to take a while for that compression to come in, and it may actually not even compress altogether because the sound happened too fast. Or if you want it to happen immediately, very quickly, not even with a delay, this is by milliseconds, I believe, you would want to put your attack at 0. So we're going to leave this at 2 for this demonstration. I just wanted you to understand what attack did. Now release, same idea, just at the end instead of at the beginning. It makes it sound more natural when you have something more like this. I don't tend to mess a lot with attack and release unless if it's something where I hear it in the sound and say the sound's going on too long or something like that. But that's usually more in a MIDI context with the attack, sustain, decay, and release. Those A, S, D, and R, those faders that you see on MIDI, that's attack, decay, sustain, and release. I can do another video on that, but that's where I tend to use attack and release. But it's definitely usable in compression, and I definitely mess with it just to see what's going on there. But really what I'm focused on is the threshold and the ratio. So I'm going to play this track again and show you what it sounds like to go from, let's have a normal ratio. I'm going to have a 3 to 1 ratio, say. So we're squashing it 3 times down from the original 1 volume. And I'm going to go ahead and move this threshold down to, say, so we're going to go from 0 to negative 40 dB. And you're going to notice, actually I'm going to go to negative 60, and you're going to notice the drastic changes that happen between these 3 thresholds that I'm going to bring them to. Because when we get down to here, you're going to notice that everything is going to sound like the same volume. And up here, it's going to sound more open, say. I'll let you decide when you listen. All right, here we go. All right, so I think the important thing to notice there is how much it opened up in between, say, I think the negative 40 dB and the negative 20. It really opened up as far as dynamics go, and it was very noticeable at how much it was actually being squashed. So hearing that is an important thing to hear because you know what the compression is actually doing. You're hearing that squash of the 3 to 1. Now, I'm going to pull the ratio up a little bit, and we're going to try a little more extreme ratio. Let's do a 6-to-1 ratio, because that's really squashing it. And you're going to see when I pull down this threshold, like, it's really squashing it. And you're going to see, very similar to this other one, but I want you to notice the difference between ratio. I'm going to actually put it up to a 10-to-1, so it's very extreme. And we're going to really hear the difference between when you squash it by 3-to-1 opposed to when you squash it by 10-to-1. So let's listen to that. Now, before we move on here, I just wanted to point something out. If you see the graph as this is playing, you'll notice that the white squares that are coming up, that's the peak. That's emulating this meter right here. It's emulating the same thing. So you can see that once those white peaks hit this curve, that's when it starts to affect. I think that's a really good visual representation of what compression actually does. It is taking that sound that would have gone straight up this line without the threshold, just straight on up, right? But it's taking it, it's actually making so that it is being affected. So I just want you to notice that. Okay, so now I found, I tend to do this when I'm working with a tool like this, like compression. I mess around. I mean, that's the only way you can really tell what something's doing. I mean, I think too many times people are so afraid to touch this stuff. They're afraid to mess with it because it's like, I don't really know what it's doing. But it's like, no, you know what the threshold does. You know what the ratio does. And you know what the attack does. Those are the three main elements of compression. And I think that I'm learning about it all the time. It's something that's hard to understand because it's all audible. It's all in our ears. It's not something we can touch, not something we can smell or pick up. We can only hear it. It's not in our world. It's just they're just sound waves, you know? So I think it's important to know that and really understand, like if you're a musician, how you understand the difference between, you know, a 9 chord and, you know, like a dominant chord or major chord or a minor chord or whatever it is, the difference in relationship between those chords, and you understand that and you can hear them. The same thing goes for compression. You need to feed audio raw through a compressor and listen to it without it, and then listen to it with it and mess with the threshold, mess with the ratio. Now that you know what the threshold and the ratio do, the ratio squashes by the amount and the threshold says where to squash it at what point. So I hope you guys learned a little something. At the very least, I hope you now know what a threshold is on a compressor and what a ratio is on a compressor and what attack and release is. And that attack and release is pretty universal. You know, you see that on MIDI instruments a lot with the attack, decay, sustain, and release, those 4 sliders that you see, the A, D, S, and R. You see that a lot on MIDI stuff. That's attack and release right there. It's just that it has the decay and sustain on it. I can make another video on that as well. But feel free, you know, if I missed anything or, you know, I didn't explain something well, I gotta be completely transparent. I tried this a couple times as far as recording this video. And when you record a video like 3 or 4 times in a row, you tend to forget like what you said in all of the videos. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you ever try this thing, I encourage you to go ahead and please, you know, make content. Like, it's good for everybody. But when you start doing it, just be aware. You don't remember everything you said. So if I missed any really good points or anything like that, or I didn't elaborate on something, please let me know in the comments. That's really, if you could do anything for me, it's 2 things, okay? Besides remembering what a threshold and ratio is. That's the number one. Forget the rest. If you don't do anything else, remember those two things. What I would love for you to do is just hit that that red subscribe button. It will help both of us in the long run, because if you want more of these videos, the almighty algorithm, as they say, it needs to serve the channel to get to you. But I know a surefire way of getting back to me, and that's just hitting subscribe. Please don't hesitate. If you're thinking anything right now and you just want to type it in the comments below, don't hesitate. Please. I'm not going to be anything but nice to you, and hopefully answer a question, or just say thank you, or say screw you, or whatever it is. I'm just here to create a community. I too often find it very hard to find a good video explaining something, and when I do, it's after 10. So I just want to create a space where people feel comfortable. As my mic stand is messing up, I want to create a place where people feel comfortable asking questions and understanding this whole business of audio and recording and making music and podcasting, just talking into microphones. I want to make people feel comfortable with it, because so many times people look at this stuff and they go, oh, it's so cool, but they don't know how to use it. So I think that's an important thing to know how to do. These are tools. These are not made to scare you. They were made to be user-friendly. They are made to be used by people. So I want to be able to share that knowledge and be able to help you better understand the recording studio, the podcast studio, the audiobook studio, whatever it is. However big the studio is, however small it is, you could have an interface and a laptop and a mic, and I'm talking to you. Or you could own a gigantic studio and I'm also talking to you, or somewhere in between. So please, if you're in between, maybe commenting or hitting subscribe, I would love if you could, because in the long run, it's going to help the community that I'm trying to create. This is Will. This has been Will the Artist. Hope you have a great day. Thanks.